Folks, the fuel system is one of the foundational systems in any car. Whether you're building it for the streets, the drag strip, or the track, you got to have your fuel system on point. And if you're turbocharging a modern car that never came from the factory with the turbocharger, well, you're gonna have to make a few changes before you can start making some jam. In this video, we're gonna be swapping the fuel system in this car from a deadhead to a return style system. We're gonna be swapping to some 1000cc injectors, throwing a big old honking Walbro 450 in the fuel tank, and we're gonna do a bunch of other mods. Essentially, we're gonna swap the entire fuel system in this car. And make sure you stay tuned to the end because we're gonna be giving away a set of 1000cc injectors. So stay tuned. A little bit later in the video, I'm gonna give you some more details on how you can get your hands on those. The first thing I wanna go ahead and start with is I want to get the fuel pump on out of here. So it's easy enough to just go ahead and pop your back seats up. Just the bottom of your back seats. And then we'll take this off. All right. Take all those screws out. Sorry, it's not very bright in here. Just have to bear with me. And then we can access the top of our fuel pump. Here we go, that's better. Oh boy, that's pretty dirty. All right, so before I take this fuel pump out to modify any of this crap, we obviously need to clean that up. We don't want any of this dirt, debris, this bullshit falling down into the fuel tank. So yeah, we're gonna need to fix that. All right, this is already loose. I tried turning it by hand and it turns just fine. So I'm gonna tighten that back down and then clean this off, and then we'll pull that out and mess with it outside of the car. All right, I took the liberty of making a wee little list of all the items we need to take care of in order to get this job done. So we gotta get the fuel pump housing modified, swap the fuel rail, swap the fuel injectors and replace the pigtails, run some lines, install the fuel pressure regulator, set the fuel pressure, update the injector dead times in the ECU, update it to a return style system in the ECU. And then we need to go out and we need to data log a pull to check and test everything. Make sure the new injectors are working well with the tune. Make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. Right now where we're at is last night I pulled off that little plastic cap. That was easy enough to just unthread. I just grabbed both my hands around there and turned it and it came off pretty easily. And the fuel pump housing just kind of wiggles itself right out of the tank. Take a tiny little bit of Moly Lube and put it on the insides of these guys here. That went a lot better. All right, bolt down the fuel rail. And that took a lot longer than I was anticipating.
I changed an alternator in 23 minutes the other day.
Aren't you fucking special?
Yeah, I did it in the dark too. Especially if it was light out, I could have done it in 20 minutes flat.
All right, well, that part's done. Okay, guys, here's where I'm at. My brother just left, so I'm back to handheld filming, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm going to be just doing stuff off camera and then filling you back in until I can get someone else to come help me real quick. But here's the deal. Right now, we just finished. Right where we left off was we ran this guy right here. Right now, we need to deal with the return side. So obviously, we're going to have this side going to, this is the inlet side of the rail. It's going to be a full bypass fuel return system. So we're going to have this end of the fuel rail supplied with fuel. This end of the fuel rail is going to leave with the full supply of fuel into the fuel pressure regulator, probably on this side. And then we will leave the fuel pressure regulator with all the excess fuel. And this will just keep whatever pressure we set on this side of the system. This will be the high side. And then everything leaving here will be the low side. So we need to run the line that goes from here all the way back to the tank. This is going to be the return side of the fuel system. So where we're at now is we have I got the fuel tank open So I don't really want to be messing with this line and risk knocking dirt while I'm running the line up underneath there and trying to get that back in there. So I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do next here? Seems like the most logical next step is to go ahead and modify the fuel pump hanger so that way I can get that fuel pump or the fuel tank plugged back up so there's no hole in the top of it, risk knocking any dirt into there. And then at that point, we'll know exactly how far into the car we have to run that line underneath the car, and we can get our overall length and start cutting this line and working on the other side. So right now, we're gonna just stop working on the front, start working on the back of the car, and work our way forward from there. And then we'll just meet up in the middle with the work that we've already done. So now it's time to go ahead and modify this fuel pump housing. Let's go ahead and take it outside, start cracking it open. Here's the deal. What I would do first is go ahead and pop these little tabs off from the side and get the top part of this hanger separated. Okay, now that that's separated, we're going to take a screwdriver, or you could just use your fingers. It's nice to have a screwdriver handy though, and pry these two tabs out. Okay, got that one loose. And then we'll go to the back here and we'll take this tab right there, hook that down, and then we can slide this fuel pressure regulator back off. And then same deal in here. We're going to pry these tabs up and pop off that lower piece. Okay, so now this whole piece should be separate other than these two wires that are holding on to the fuel level sending unit. At this point, we are going to pop open the main housing for the fuel pump. So take your screwdriver or your fingernails, pry these tabs out. Sometimes it can be better to use your fingernails because, especially if you're working with a little bit brittle plastic, you can be a lot more careful with them. Okay, there's your fuel pump right here. So the modification we're going to need to make right now to this thing is we need to figure out how to delete this part of it. The fuel pressure regulator part of it. Because we don't want this. We want all of the fuel going straight to the rail. We'll bypass it up at the rail. The task is to figure out how exactly we're going to do that. Now let's go ahead and start brainstorming here. So I decided what I'm going to do with this fuel pressure regulator side here, and the game plan is to... So what I did is I'm going to go ahead and cut off this this plastic line right here, get rid of that, and then we'll take a chunk of 3/8 submersible fuel line, and you got to make sure it's submersible fuel hose. If it's not submersible, don't use it. And then I got a 3/8 by 1/4 inch barb fitting, and then a 1/4 inch plug, and put a tiny bit of sealant on the plug, and then threaded that in there nice and tight. Put a 1/2 inch PEX ring on there, and then just clamped it down with the PEX ring tool. So here, I'll do this side real quick. We'll just pop that on there, and it's going to fit on snug because of the PEX ring. So make sure you position that PEX ring, because once it's expanded and this is over the nipple, it's going to be real hard to do that. So let me shove this on there real quick. I need both my hands. All right, so we end up with that, and that stays out of the way of everything. No big deal. And I'm going to go ahead and take the PEX tool and clamp that down. So open her up all the way. Get it on there. And there we go. That's not going anywhere. And that'll be nice and sealed up. Alrighty, now that we got that fuel pressure regulator crap deleted with this little plug here, it's time to add the bulkhead fitting for our new fuel return. So we need to drill a hole right here. I got, looks like a 9/16 or something. Yeah, 9/16 bit here. So we'll just get this sucker drilled right out. Try to aim for the dead center. Looks pretty darn good.
was a little bit painful, not gonna lie. But harmless nonetheless, I believe. I need to waller this out a little bit. And not much of a tight fit anymore. It's okay, this washer will take care of that. Okay, now we'll need to figure out how to grab a hold of that with like a wrench or something. And get that tightened down. Might be like a channel locks type of thing. All right, it's an 18 mil after all. All right, that feels good. This part's done. Wiring still looks good. Everything still looks how it's supposed to be. All right, sucker's going back in the tank. Put this sucker back in here. Fish the sending unit in there first. Kind of rotate her in there, like so. All right, so it does kind of spring up a little bit. You got to spring it down. I should have put this on before, but hey, hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. Spider. Did you jump? Oh, I thought I saw you jump. All right, I'm gonna fight with this ring for a little bit longer. You can go ahead and cut the video. All right, so I just took my 20 foot length of AN hose and I fed it through the bottom here. And I'm just gonna feed this all through. And then you can run it underneath the car and use the brackets that come in those Evil Energy kits to keep it held up from dangling down super low. You'll have to excuse the mess in the back of this car. Okey-dokey. Put that on. Looks like it might stick up a little higher than I'd like, but let's see here. Yeah, it definitely sticks up a little bit too much. Might have to clearance this. That's good for now. And then we'll just go underneath the car, run it all along the front, feed it up into the engine bay, and then cut it off. Mark it where we need to mark it and cut it off. I'll show you guys how to cut AN line properly here when we get back. I gotta stop though and go get some groceries. Alrighty, so here is where it comes down from the tank. That's where we just fed it through inside the car. And it just follows along all those factory hard lines. I tucked it up underneath all these brackets, and I'll go through and take some zip ties, make sure that doesn't come out. And it runs above all the way back. Tuck that in further. I just tucked it in above the fattest one in the middle right there. It seems to nest in there real nice. And then it should have no problem just kind of staying where it's at. Alrighty folks, let's take a second to revisit our checklist here. The fuel pump housing modification, that's already done. We can check that off. Fuel rail, that's done. Fuel injectors and pigtails. The injectors are done, but the pigtails are not done yet. Running the lines, that's what we're working on right now. So we'll come back to the pigtails real quick after we take care of this. So as far as cutting your line goes, this is the trick. You just wrap a roll of tape around it, and you can get as accurate as you need to with this. You can mark it out or whatever you need to, but the way I like to do it typically, if you're working in like the engine bay or something like that, where you got a lot of space, you can get it just close enough, and then if you need to move it around somewhere, you have enough slack and enough room to move it around. If you're working with bigger line, or if you're working in a more tight space, then you might need to be more accurate with this. But in my case, we don't need to be. So let's go ahead and get this cut real quick. So it'll be wobbly. Oh well. Not too shabby, even though I slipped with it 2 or 3 times. Most of them are going to be threaded inside of the portion that goes under the hose, and they're almost always reverse threaded. In fact, I've never come across one that's not reverse thread. So lefty tighty to get this part on. Screw that down. It's easier sometimes to just hold the fitting and twist the hose around. You'll feel it seat. Then you can look in there and you can see it's all the way seated all the way around. Look like that. And then we'll take, oh, I left it, where did I leave it? It's on the hood of the car. Give it a little bit of lube. And 6 lines are 19 millimeter, typically. Sometimes you find some that are like 17s, but almost always 19s. You can use a ratchet, you can use an AN wrench, you could use a regular open end wrench, you could use a box end wrench, you could use channel locks if you're real ghetto, but whatever. Whatever we gotta do is get it tight. How tight? Tight enough to where it don't leak. Yeah, I usually just bottom the fitting out. Yeah, the straight fittings are the most annoying because they have the smallest hex right here. Like a lot of the other fittings have a wider hex that you have more room to get your wrench on there. But this will go right here. I'll just leave that on there. Somewhat loose for now. That's gonna attach right here. This one's gonna attach right here. And this side's gonna be capped off. And this one will go to map reference. All right. Let's do the pigtails real quick. On Hondas, you're always gonna have one color that is consistent across all the injectors. So on this one, we have a yellow and a black with a yellow, or yellow. We have a yellow and a yellow with a black stripe on this one. On this one, we have a blue and a yellow with a black stripe. On this one, we have a red and a yellow with a black stripe. Okay, so each one of them has a yellow with a black stripe and then some random colored wire on it. So the random colored wire is going to be your negative side, and the yellow with the black stripe, the one that's consistent across all of them, that's going to be your 12 volt. Oh, looks like I forgot one. Okay. Shove those in there, snap them down, and they're locked in. Then we'll just do that to all 4 injectors. And we'll be wired up. Obviously, if you were going to solder them, you would solder them. If you were going to freaking zap them together with your mind, you would zap each one of them together with your mind, so you get the idea. You don't need to watch me do every single one of these. Last night, those -6 ORB to AN6 male fittings showed up for the fuel pressure regulator, so I got that all squared away. And that is it. Like I said, we just ran a straight fitting from the outlet of the rail to the inlet of the fuel pressure regulator, then a 90 to the return, and that goes back to the tank. So now, at this point, what we need to do is we should just revisit our list. I went ahead and added a couple extra things. We need to check for leaks In the system, we need to add a vacuum reference to the fuel pressure regulator right here. And we can cross a couple more things off. We're done running lines. We're done with the fuel pressure regulator. Looks like we need to fire it up and check for leaks and set the fuel pressure next. And then we can run the vacuum reference. Okay, so what we're gonna do in order to check on this fuel pump and check for leaks and everything is what we wanna do is we wanna get it to run continuously. So that way we're not sitting here and just priming it over and over again. So we'll go down to engine functions. We'll drop down the engine functions menu here. And then we'll go down to fuel pump. Click on that. Click on the main page, fuel pump. And then we'll change the active state to high. Now listen to what happens when I change the active state to high. Currently the fuel pump's not running because it finished priming. We'll switch it to high. Fuel pump kicks on and stays on. Okay, so since I'm in the car already, I'll just check this one back here for leaks. This is the return side, so it's low pressure. Feels fine. And I can hear the fuel running back into the tank. Okay, so our fuel pressure actually looks to be spot on. Right about 43.5 is where we want to set it. It looks to be about 45, 46. These fittings are all nice and dry. All right, we'll call that good and leak free. And then fuel pressure is already set. Okay, and then just since we're right here, I want to mention when you're setting the fuel pressure, if you have a vacuum reference going to your fuel pressure regulator, do not set the fuel pressure with the engine running. Do this, leave the engine off. Otherwise, you'll be creating vacuum and creating a suction on the diaphragm here, and you'll be setting your injector differential pressure if you do it while under vacuum. You need to set your base fuel pressure to 43.5. That way, once your vacuum reference starts pulling vacuum or pushing boost, you're raising and lowering the pressure from 43.5. I think I covered my bases there. All right. And since we're done with that, we'll switch her back to low. Boom, fuel pump's off. Okay, now the rest of this stuff is gonna be all on the computer. We need to go change the injector dead times. All the injector data needs to be updated. So might as well go in the house and do this. Don't wanna sit in this leaning back awkward car. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and cross off the vacuum reference. Went ahead and did that real quick. I just ran a little vacuum line to a T over to this one right here. And I didn't put any hose clamps on there yet. I'll zip tie them when I get the turbo, but right now it's just gonna be suction, so there's not really a huge risk of them popping off. Let me show you real quick what I did here in the tune file. So what we need to do is we need to update our injector dead times to match what we have on our chart, and I'll put up on screen what I have from Graham's Injectors, what the dead times that I found. And so we want to put the flow rates and the dead times. You're going to end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So from Haltech, the dead times are going to look a little bit different, but you just want to go into your table axis setup and change the values to match what you have on your chart. So like Injector Dynamics is going to have a much wider range on their data that they give you. Graham's here just has 8 to 16 volts every 2 volts. And then they have a lot wider range of the PSI, so you end up with a really deep chart instead of a wide chart like on Injector Dynamics, if that makes any sense. But you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this. Just input all those values that you have from your data sheet. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to go over to the fuel tuning and change from constant, which is what you will have been on, to map reference. Because anytime you have a map reference going to your fuel pressure regulator, you need to be on map reference. All right, let's go ahead and go upload this to the car and spark this thing up, see how she runs. Here we go. It's not happy. map sensor. Hang on. Figure out what that's all about. I forgot to hook it up, and that's what it's all about. All right, try that again. There we go. That's a lot happier.
All right, guys, I'm finishing off this video here, and I just wanted to jump in and kind of give you, obviously the car has come a long way. You can see the engine bay looks a lot different. We got a custom harness in here. The whole fuel setup looks a little bit different than it did when I first made this video. And the fuel pump housing and the fuel pump itself are also different. So I just wanted to come in here and show you guys what the final form of this fuel system is. So in the engine bay, so as far as the actual physical setup, nothing has changed other than the routing of the line. So we still have one AN line coming from the tank and one factory hard line coming from the tank. We are now using the factory hard line as the return, which hooks up to the top of the pump here. And then we are using the AN line that we ran, which goes to this bulkhead fitting, as our feed line. So before, we just had this AN fitting open on the bottom side, and it was returning all the fuel. What I did was I bought another bulkhead fitting like this that has a barbed fitting on the bottom so that I could clamp my feed hose onto the bottom side of the AN line and use the AN line as my feed line versus this factory hard line. I don't really know that there's much of a difference between the two of them, diameter wise, flow capability wise. But what I did not want to do is run the full flow of fuel through whatever mechanism is inside of this white plastic housing here, because there's something inside of there it's not just a straight through. Even though it looks like it is, it's not just straight through. The fuel flows around here in some weird way, and I just didn't want to deal with that restricting my flow on the inlet side. On the return side, if it restricts a little bit of flow, that's not a big deal. That's not my main concern. But anyway, when we first took this thing apart, you saw that the fuel pump was sitting inside of this weird little plastic. Actually, I still have it over here. It was sitting inside this weird little plastic housing thing that held it all kind of in the middle. It doesn't fit over the hump of this pump right here, so I just ixnayed that whole thing. And the wiring, as you can see, it looks a little sketchy, but you got to remember that obviously this connector and these connectors on the bottom side here are not sealed connectors. Fuel is a very, very poor conductor of electricity. So the fact that there's a little bit of exposed on the black there, a little bit of exposed on the red there. Now, we don't want them touching, but the fact that they are submerged in fuel, they're not really going to move themselves to a point where they're touching, just through driving. But the fuel itself is not going to complete the circuit, so we don't really have to worry about the fact that they're submerged in the fuel, and there's a little bit open right there. But this is the whole setup right here as far as the fuel pump. That's how I made this stock fuel pump hat work with the Walbro 450 fuel pump. And I mean, that's a big old honking pump that we got down in there. So it was a little bit of a trick to get this whole thing to work. So you see, we got the bulkhead fitting that goes up just straight through the hat. And then the return side, I capped off one side of it, and all the return flow just dumps out right here where that hose was originally. I just cut that off. And so since this bulkhead fitting goes through the top here, if you remember earlier in the video, I drilled this hole and it was a bit oversized. So I wanted to seal this off, and I tried using JB Weld. This has been like this for about 6 months, and it held for a really long time. But in the last few weeks, I've started to smell some fuel in the cabin, and I can tell that this thing is not holding up the way I wanted it to. Earlier in the video, you saw I used Grams injectors to do this whole deal. Now I got rid of those Grams injectors and threw in some Injector Dynamics ID 1000s. Now, the reason I like these injectors so much is they're like $100 more than the Grams injectors. I barely saved anything. And if you think about it, and the fact that I ended up buying the Injector Dynamics anyway, well, I really didn't save $1. I actually spent more in the long run. Buy once, cry once. But Injector Dynamics provides you with the best data that is available. They have by being supported by Bosch, they have so much research and development that goes into their injectors, and they provide you with all that information. You can spend almost as much money as a set of ID1000s on some other random injectors, and don't be fooled by the amount of money you're spending. If you're not getting that data, you might as well be getting junk injectors. And Grams provides you with a decent amount of data. The problem is that it's just not enough. Injector Dynamics takes the cake on all the data. I mean, when I went from the Grams, it went from running okay to the Injector Dynamics, just plugging in the data, changing nothing other than the injectors themselves and the data, made a massive difference on how this car runs. I mean, it's little things, but I like to hammer out the little things when I can. That doesn't mean that these Grams injectors are bad. These things actually worked really well. They just weren't perfect. Wide open throttle performance was absolutely amazing. It was just like really, really low throttle input. They idled great. Wide open throttle, great. Mid-range, pretty good. It was just that really low throttle input, like when you're on the freeway cruising at like 60 in fifth gear and you have like 10% throttle. These things really just kind of had a hard time figuring out what was going on. The short-term trims were kind of going crazy. But on a drag car, these things where they're just going to be operating at idle, burnout, wide open throttle, those things would be absolutely awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give these things away. That's right. I'm giving away this set of Grams 1000cc injectors to one of you guys. So stay tuned for my next couple of videos. I'm going to go over how you can go ahead and get your hands on these things. Set of $450 injectors that you can have for absolutely free. So, like I said, stay tuned to the videos. Like I said, stay tuned. Over the next few videos, I'll share the details on how you can get your hands on those. I just haven't hammered out exactly how I'm gonna pick a winner, what the circumstances are gonna be. So leave a comment down below. Tell me how you think the giveaway should go. But that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.